Southeastern Regional Development Agency. We are in partnership with Carbon County and the Office of Energy Development and Envoy Public Labs. We're hosting 3 different workshops throughout the county, all regarding nuclear energy development. That's become a hot topic and a buzzword around here, so we just want to help educate the community, also get any feedback or questions or concerns that the community may have on nuclear development here in Carbon and Emery counties. And so first, today will be kind of a nuclear 101, like understanding what is nuclear. When we're talking about nuclear, are we talking about the nuclear power plants that were built, in the 50s and 60s? We now have a nuclear microreactor, a small modular reactor being built in Emery County. So what does that mean for Carbon and Emery counties? And so just kind of broad overview of nuclear from the 60s till now.
Why make a decision?
Workshop number 2, I'll give you a little teaser, is going to be from mining and milling to power generation. We'll have industry leaders that all deal with power generation, with the mining process and the milling process that's happening down in San Juan County here in Utah. Little known fact that Utah, specifically San Juan County, has the only licensed and operational uranium mill in the whole United States. And it's right here in our backyard. So that will be workshop number 2, and then workshop number 3, following kind of the life cycle of nuclear energy, is after power generation, what now? What does that look like? And we'll have subject matter experts on kind of the retirement process and what that looks like. So first, I'm going to introduce Tracy Rees. She is the Deputy Director at the Utah Office of Energy Development. And she's going to kind of explain what these community outreach events are all about and how they're happening all across Utah.
Thanks, Jade. Thanks, Carbon and Emery counties, for being here tonight. It's good to see all of you here. I know you have busy lives like all of us do. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to come here and be with us tonight. So as Jade said, I'm one of the Deputy Directors at the Utah Office of Energy Development. If you don't know who we are a policy office. We are not regulatory, we're not engaged in economic development. We're here to provide policy, data, research, information, education. That is the role of our office. So in October of 2024, when Governor Cox announced Operation Gigawatt, which is a bold plan to double the state's electrical generating capacity, one of the things that they were looking at, how can we do that? Utah already enjoys a really diverse energy mix, but we were thinking we can look at nuclear, we can look at geothermal, we can look at natural gas, we can look at battery storage, and add to our already diverse energy mix. But we knew nuclear sounds really new, it sounds unfamiliar, people have questions, they have concerns. And so we knew as a state, if we want to look at nuclear energy and bring that here to Utah, even though we already have some nuclear pieces here, we have this nation's only operational uranium mill, we have Westinghouse in Weber County that manufactures certain parts for nuclear, but we knew our communities were going to have questions and concerns. And that wasn't going to be the same for every county. Some counties are going to be interested about mining and what does that mean. Other counties are going to be concerned about workforce. Are there opportunities in this for us? Other people are going to be concerned about safety. So we wanted to make sure that we can come into every single county, all 29 counties, and make sure that we have subject matter experts that can answer your questions. And that's what we're doing here. And we're customizing these for each county, not only in the subject matter experts that we bring to you, but in the format and in the way that we present this information and engage with you. And we think of this as the start of a conversation. This isn't just one-off and we're here to talk to you tonight and then it's over. We want to continue this conversation. So if you have questions, if you have concerns, we really encourage you to visit our website. We've created a lot of resources that are very easily accessible, but you can also do a deep dive and you can find information and we can connect you to other resources on whatever question you might have about nuclear energy. So we're here tonight to talk about nuclear energy with Tay from Envoy Public Labs. When we wanted to do this community engagement and go to all of our counties and talk to our constituents, what are your concerns? What do you want to know about nuclear energy? We knew we needed a partner. And so we actually put out a proposal, and we received many responses to that. And the company we selected had to have our same commitment to grassroots, bottoms-up engagement. They had to have experience in nuclear. They had to have expertise. They had to understand what we're talking about here. And that's why we have Envoy here with us. They are our partners in our community engagement. We're doing this statewide, and we're happy to have them here. Tay knows a ton about nuclear energy. He's one of the subject matter experts to talk to you tonight. And as Jade said, we have 2 more of these coming. But again, this is the start of a conversation. So if you have questions that you don't get answered, we'll find answers for you. Don't hesitate to reach out to our office, and we hope to see you at the other 2 events we're going to do for your county. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Tay. Or Jade.
Yeah.
Okay.
I neglected to go over kind of the format for tonight. So, Tay Stevenson, Envoy Public Labs, he's going to give a brief presentation. There will be a question and answer period. So after Tay is done, we'll go through a process to get your questions submitted to me, and then I'll ask the questions to not just Tay, but also we have Commissioner Larry Jensen here and Commissioner Jared Haddock, and they'll also, so between the 3 of them, they'll fill any questions that you might have. So if you have questions, keep them till the end, and you will have an opportunity to ask those questions. So with that, we'll have Tay.
Thanks, Jade. Can everybody hear me all right? Good. So again, I'm Tay Stevenson, Taylor, whichever you guys prefer. I'm from a little town called Brainerd, Minnesota. Brainerd's about 2 hours north of the Twin Cities. It's also the home of Paul Bunyan. I mention that because when I come to events like this, I think it's important that you don't have someone coming from DC, right? Like I come from an area where I think it's really, like we are just large enough to have a Costco, which I am very proud of. But you know, still very much, I mean, we got like 13,000 people in my hometown. I come from a town that used to have a paper mill, 700 jobs there, used to have a state hospital, 500 jobs there, and used to have over 1,000 jobs at the rail yard. That's down to 100. So I come from a tourist town, come from a tourist economy. And that's part of the reason why I come out across the country, and I've been doing this for the last 10 years, because I don't want to see other places that have an opportunity for economic transition or economic opportunities like nuclear go the same way Brainerd's gone. I've seen what it's done to my hometown. So if you hear me get a little passionate, that's why, right? Because I've seen what happens when you have these large employers leave town, and the best job you can get is at the Costco, right? So this is really going to kind of be 2 presentations in one. First half, we're going to talk a little bit about current generation nuclear and really get more into like overview of advanced reactors. The second part of this, we're going to talk about coal versus nuclear. And I want to be very clear. You might hear me say coal to nuclear, just because we tried to make it coal and nuclear and it just wasn't as sticky. Doesn't mean that nuclear has to replace coal. There's a lot of really great examples where communities that have coal stations are looking at keeping their coal stations running and having nuclear kind of coming in. And really what I want to get into is how do those jobs compare up, right? How can we look at a broader economic plan for an entire community? So let's go to the first slide. So when we talk about current generation nuclear, right? Who here has seen The Simpsons? There we go. Yeah, I'm a child of the 90s, so, you know, when we're thinking current generation nuclear, again, it's, you know, big cooling towers, right? You know, these big plants. I always say, and this is why we got it on the slide here, it's kind of like Henry Ford's Model T, right? You can get your favorite color as long as it's black, right? The way we used to build nuclear power plants in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you get your favorite nuclear reactor as long as it was a 1,000 megawatt light water reactor. Now, you might hear like terms like pressurized water reactor, boiling water reactor. Those are the 2 kind of main types of what, you know, current gen, or what people call Gen 2 or Gen 3 reactors. Don't worry about the difference. I mean, some people make their broth by, you know, putting the chicken carcass in the pot and, you know, simmer it on the stove. Some people put it in an Instant Pot pressure cooker, you know, get it done in an hour. At the end of the day, you're making soup, right? What we're doing is making nuclear energy, and the most important thing here is we're using water. We're using water as what's called the moderator. So there's a great 1950 Disney produced TV series where they had this kind of very professory guy put a bunch of ping pong balls on mouse traps, and he threw a ball, and you can imagine what happens, right? One mouse trap springs and it throws ping pong balls, and you get all these ping pong balls floating around, right? So when we're doing when there's a fission reaction, it's very important that the ping pong balls and neutrons are going at the right speed, right? If you hit a unstable atom at the right speed, it'll split apart like those mouse traps. It'll create this chain reaction, right? That's what we're controlling to make that nuclear heat, right? So we're using the water to control the speed of the neutrons. We're also using water as a coolant, right? We're using water to keep the reactor, you guys have all heard, from melting down, right? We want to keep it at the right temperature. So that's, when we're talking about current gen reactors, 94 reactors across the country. That's at 53 different sites right now in 20 different states. Every blue dot you see here, that's a reactor. So in my home state of Minnesota, we got 2 down at Prairie Island and 1 up at Monticello. We pronounce it the same way you guys pronounce Monticello, which I appreciate. All right, next slide. So again, my background, I'm not a nuclear engineer. I have degrees in government philosophy. The reason I have a job in nuclear is because I can translate nuclear engineering speak into football metaphors. That's what I'm really good at. So when I think about advanced reactors, I immediately go to kind of the government definition. That's where my brain works best. What I've got up here is an excerpt from 2017. This is the Nuclear Energy Innovation and Modernization Act, or what's called NEMA. And NEMA lays out the definition for an advanced reactor. Now, like most government people, right, they couldn't settle on just one definition. They created a huge definition that you could drive a truck through. So when you look at lower waste yields, greater fuel utilization, all of these things that are things you could have in an advanced reactor. The important thing I want you guys to take away is this top one: additional inherent safety features. So when we're thinking about those current gen reactors, they are incredibly safe. And the reason they're incredibly safe is we've got a backup to a backup to a backup to a backup to a backup. If you don't believe me, you guys have all probably heard of Fukushima, right? So there's a plant called Davis-Besse. It's in Ohio. And you don't have to go back. They know what Ohio is. Davis-Besse, it's right on the kind of shores of Lake Erie. And I've had the pleasure of touring that plant, and I've been in the building. It's a watertight outbuilding that has not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 independent backup generators in a watertight building in case there's a tsunami off of Lake Erie, right? So when we're talking about defense in depth, there's no single point of failure, right? When we're talking about advanced reactors, really what we're trying to get to is what we call, colloquially, what we would call walk-away safe, right? This is kind of the idea of passive and inherent safety. The engineering is what's carrying it. It's the laws of physics, right? So that might be gravity, right? So if we all think gravity is going to hold, probably going to be a good safety case. It might be what we call temperature coefficients, right? You might have a molten salt reactor design. We know that if we have what's called a freeze plug. That plug has a known melting point, right? And if things get too hot, that plug melts, salt drains into a basin, turns into actual salt, and reaction stops, right? So we're leaning into the laws of physics, and really the idea here is that with advanced reactors, we want to get away from someone having to push a button, pull a knob, turn a crank to get the thing into a safe mode. If anything goes wrong with these advanced reactors, what we want is a design that recognizes through the engineering, through the physics, that something's wrong and goes into a safe mode without any type of input. Next slide.
Yeah.
So a lot of times advanced reactors are broken down by size. That's one way to kind of slice this up. So I want to start there because this is kind of what people, when you read in the news and you hear things like small modular reactors or SMRs, right? Your micro reactors, these reactors you can put on the back of a flatbed truck or whatever. right? So when you think in microreactors, we really are talking small, right? Think like big diesel gen sets, right? Like if you're up in Alaska and you're a remote village, you probably have a big diesel generator that's producing your power. And that's really the market that these microreactors, that among others, that's what the microreactors are kind of shooting for, is that kind of smaller, compact, sometimes mobile. There's a lot of different designs. I'll get a little bit more into that in a sec. But we're talking very, very small footprint. This would be like, those are familiar with the Valor project. Valor would be in this microreactor category. Small modular reactor. Now the idea is 300 megawatts-ish, right? TerraPower is a little over 4. You guys heard of the TerraPower project up in Cameroon? They're shooting for that range. Now, again, the most important thing to understand here, these aren't based on, again, any type of laws of physics or some type of safety case. Don't believe anything where people say, well, it's a small reactor, so it's more safe. That's not true, right? It could be technically, but really it's not. Basically, the reason why you have these different sizes is you have companies that are trying to get into different markets. So why 300 megawatts? It's about the size of coal station. As coal stations were going down, they were like, hey, this could be a nice one-to-one replacement. The other thing that both microreactors and small modular reactors are trying to do is, again, take advantage of advances we've made in modular construction, advanced manufacturing. This analogy was a lot better when Boeing airplanes were, blowing doors off the side, but the idea was, basically like an airplane, right? You've got these big hangars, right, and we're assembling them in there. And so really it's a matter of cost control. So again, a lot of times I'll hear in forums like this, well, we're not sure about this unproven technology. A lot of the nuclear technology we're talking about here has been demonstrated up at primarily Idaho National Lab, going back to like the 60s and 70s. The thing that's changed in the last 10, 20 years is that we can 3D print stuff now, right? We have advanced alloys. I've literally seen fuel 3D printed. Like these are the advances in technology that we've made. Not on the nuclear side, on the construction side, on the welding. We can do different welds now. That's the advantage that we're trying to take advantage. That's what's really pushing these technologies to commercialization. And these kind of stand in contrast to your large conventional reactors, right? Those Gen 3, Gen 2, those big cooling tower reactors that are generally stick-built, right? We want to control cost, because again, if anybody's heard negative things about nuclear, one of the things that comes up is nuclear is pretty expensive, right? So how can we control the cost on it? Next slide. So again, this kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of the size. The other thing I want to get into, water usage, for example, pretty important topic here, right? Up in the land of 10,000 legs, we have a little bit more water, less of an issue, right? The thing to think about with advanced reactors, and this is with this good metaphor here, think about shoes, right? You might look at me and be like, this is a guy who owns one pair of shoes. Au contraire. I got my Iron Rangers on now, I got some Birkenstocks, I got hiking boots, I've got water shoes, right? I got dress shoes. I don't wear my dress shoes, but I've got them, right? And all those different shoe types are for different things, right? So you might have a microreactor that makes sense, again, when you're trying to replace that diesel gen set, right? Might have a situation where you have a coal unit that's retired, and you want to replace that generation, so you're looking for that size. But you also might want to take advantage of different reactor types, right? You remember I talked about light water reactors? You have different reactors now that they might use molten salts, right? They might use, like in the case of Valor, where you have a high temperature gas reactor, you might be using graphite as your moderator and helium as your coolant. So now you're using less water, you're using different materials to produce the same type of fission reaction. And that's when we talk about the variety of outputs here, that's the other thing, that's a secret of advanced reactors, is we're no longer talking about reactors just as electricity generators. There's a project down in Texas right now being led by a company called X Energy. They're working with Dow Chemical. They're not producing electricity. They're replacing a natural gas unit and creating high temperature processing for chemical cracking processes, right? So that's one of the things to me that's really cool. In fact, in Minnesota, they took one of the current plants at Prairie Island and they created hydrogen. They literally they took some steam off the plant and they basically ran a hydrogen process and created hydrogen out of it. So this is kind of the new frontier that advanced reactors are pushing to, is going beyond electricity to different types of products that can be used for industrial purposes, alternative fuels. Like for example, you see aviation. We're not talking about necessarily, we've tried putting a nuclear reactor in a plane, it's not great, we don't want to do that. But you can create carbon neutral synthetic aviation fuel using a reactor, right? Again, you see like concrete here, steel, that's where that process can be used using these different advanced reactors. So just like kind of your different, you got your hiking boots if you want to go out hiking, you got your dancing shoes if you want to go out dancing, right? You got different advanced reactors you can use for different things, and that gives us a lot more flexibility. So that's kind of end of part one. Next slide. So let's talk about coal and nuclear, right? Now, this comes from important. If anybody's interested, come up to me after. We can get you a link to this. This is a program that I work with called the GAIN, or Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear. They pioneered a lot of this work. We were in a lot of coal communities where, again, they're looking at how do we keep the jobs, right? How do we keep families intact, right? How do we plan for the next 100 years, right? And so they wanted to understand, what are we talking about in terms of jobs here? And as you can see, nuclear compares pretty favorably to coal jobs. I mean, coal plants are great. I got a chance to tour Huntington a couple years ago. It's an amazing facility, right? Produces a lot of jobs. You look at a comparable, I mean, you can kind of see the size now. Huntington is about twice this size, right? So maybe kind of closer to 900. You can kind of add these together. The two coal plants make about 2,500 megawatts here. So you kind of get the sense of jobs. There's actually there's more jobs per megawatt hour that's produced at a nuclear plant. You just have more people, right? Let's go to the next slide. And this one, don't strain your eyes. This is just so that I can show my math here, right? I'm going to have a little more digestible slide up next. But this is all those jobs at a power plant broken down by types. So you've got management, business and financial operations, engineering, computers, life and physical sciences, production applications, construction, and you see that there's a lot of job transferability. You have some job categories that you have a little bit more in nuclear, some job categories that have a little bit less. If you go to the next slide, and this is really the most important thing. Less than a high school diploma, about the same number of jobs for a person who has if you're looking for economic opportunity of less than a high school diploma, about the same number of jobs at a nuclear plant as at a coal plant. High school diploma or equivalent, again, about the same amount of jobs. Some college, no degree, again, about the same number of jobs. A little bit more in nuclear, and again, you see there are actually job gains with nuclear. A lot of those are in your associate's degree, bachelor's degree, master's degree, or your PhDs for the real smart people, right? And again, at a nuclear plant, obviously you're going to have nuclear engineers. But you're not going to, you don't have all nuclear engineers that work at a plant, right? Look at this next category. You have 14 more security guards, right? You think of folks who maybe have like an ex-military background, right? They have an opportunity to get a job at a nuclear plant. The one that I think is most important here, the nuclear power reactor operators. It's the highest paying job you can get without some advanced degree. If you've got a high school diploma, you can get a reactor operator's license, be making about $123,000 a year. It's the median income for a reactor operator. It's a pretty good job. So what we're talking about here is, again, not just economic opportunity, but it's economic opportunity for all different types of people, right? Just for every nuclear engineer, you need 20 electricians, you need welders, you need pipe fitters, right? You need people who are working in management, you need people who are working in administration. right? It takes a village to run these plants. Anybody who works at a coal plant knows this, right? Again, a lot of those jobs, it's about 80% job transferability. You can go right from a coal station to a nuclear station. In fact, one of the jokes that one of my mentors, Christine King, director of Jade, talks about is that one of the biggest transitions from a coal plant to a nuclear plant is in a coal plant you have usually digitized control rooms. Nuclear plants right now, a lot of them still are stuck in the 70s, a lot of analog equipment still. So, next slide. And then this is kind of where I'm going to end here. And so, kind of, this is about kind of the population range of this area here. Again, similar to where my hometown is. I wish I could be making this presentation in my hometown. Minnesota has a nuclear moratorium. I'm hoping it gets lifted soon. I want my state to be doing this. I envy Utah for this. When you look at, and this isn't property taxes, this is, when we're talking about income numbers, this is income, both the jobs at the plant, but also the jobs that are created by the plant being there, right? You need a barber, you need some people working at restaurants, right? So when you're talking about, let's say like an SMR, 300 megawatts, you got about a $12 million income for the community with a 300 megawatt coal plant. It's about $24.9 million in income is what this study figures when you're talking about economic, an income impact. So you're talking about an added income of $12.9 million with a nuclear plant. So again, my main message with this part of the presentation, when we're talking about coal and nuclear, we're talking about any of the above here, right? These things can work together, they can work together really well, and particularly build off the workforce that's already existing. It's one of the really attractive things about areas that have these energy professionals, is you don't have to train them how to make water. They already know how to do that, right? So there's a lot that we can do in terms of transferability. And that is exactly my 20 minutes. Thank you guys.
Okay, thank you, Tay. Like I said, there would be an opportunity for you all to ask questions. So we're going to do a little bit different format. First, I'm going to invite Commissioner Jensen, Commissioner Haddock, if you want to come up so that you can answer some of the questions. If you have a smartphone and are able to, you can scan this QR code and it'll take you to a website called Slido, and it'll take you right to a question that says, what would you like to ask our presenters? And then from there, you can type in your questions, and you'll submit it to me, and then I can help get them to the presenters. If you do not feel comfortable to do the QR code, or you don't have a smartphone or don't have the capability, just raise your hand, and Patrick and Shannon have index cards with pencils, and you can write your question down, and I'll run them up to me. And so the reason we do it in this format is because one, it'll help not ask duplicate questions, and two, it will track all of your questions so then we can go back and address them at a later date. Which I believe Tracy said that the Office of Energy Development is collecting them all, and they'll do like a statewide Q&A from all the questions that they receive throughout the county. So with that, as you ask your questions, we have a few that have come in. We'll just start it, and I guess we'll just kind of popcorn it. Maybe what I'll do is give you two a mic to share it. I know, because I just got iron and share a mic. So we already have one. That could have been bad. How many of the small nuclear reactors are currently producing power in the U.S.? That might be a take question.
That's an easy one. 0 right now. We do have, again, I mentioned 2 projects that are currently in development. So Kemmer, you've got the TerraPower reactor that's being built. They've already got their construction license. And then X Energy working with Dow. You also have a number of smaller micro-reactors that are being worked on right now. So there's a microreactor that just was put into the Dome facility at INL. That's a company by the name of Radiant. again, you guys are all familiar with the Valley. There's a number of other companies. I think there's about 14 different companies that are actually involved in the DOE's microreactor pilot program right now. So none are producing power right now, but ask me again in like 5 years. And that number is going to be good.
Okay, this might be a question for all three of you. So there's a couple questions that deal with the coal burning power plants. And so in our community, we have coal burning power plants and coal mines. If we do away with the coal power plants, it may impact our jobs already as well. How do we account for these lost jobs? I'm going to add to that question, whoever asked that, and revenue. Because there's some other questions about coal mines traditionally pay royalties. Does nuclear power pay royalties? If so, what are those? And also, I'm going to add to that, what are the added revenue sources off of nuclear? So whoever.
I think maybe to give a little history to, if you all remember, Rocky Mountain Power had been received mandates from the federal government to close the 2 power plants over in Envoy County early, one in 28 and one in 32, because of some air quality restraints that the Biden administration had put in place. And so at that time, Rocky Mountain Power began to have meetings with Carbon Envoy County and individuals to try and see what the people's thoughts would be about having nuclears, because Rocky Mountain Power was thinking they would probably have to replace the coal-fired plants with some nuclear. And so there was quite a bit of education occurring for those of us who knew nothing about it. And it started really, and the idea was that if the communities where these nuclear reactors would end up don't want them, it would be really hard for Rocky Mountain Power, for example, to even suggest that they do it. And so there was an idea that we really had to do some education, help people understand if these reactors were brought here, what the risks are. So they actually hired an individual, and he spent quite a few days here in Carbon Envoy County training to help people understand that. So then Rocky Mountain Power changed their plans, and currently their plants are expected to go out, I think it's to 2045. So the coal, it's been determined that's not going to go away. It probably won't even close in 2045, but we need extra power. And so how are we going to get that? Because it's unlikely the coal-fired power plant will be built. Sorry about changing that subject. The question, though, about coal.
The revenue, basically.
The revenue. So,
the revenue.
Yeah, I think there's what we call mineral lease money that would come to the county where the coal is produced if the coal is owned by the federal government. So the BLM lands or the Forest Service lands where our coal mines are, there's a fee attached to every ton of coal that is supposed to come back to the county where that coal is mined. So that would go away if coal goes away. I don't quote anything on the nuclear side that we can compare with that. So that would be a drawback. But currently, there's no coal produced in Carbon County anyway. Hasn't been for several years. Doesn't look like we'll have much happening in that area. Anyway. Good.
Yeah, I think you explained that very well, Larry. For me, my father-in-law was a coal miner, and I really have a great love and appreciation for the sacrifice of that resource that we had here in the county. And it was heartbreaking to me when I was even running for commission club they put a date on when they were going to close down the power plants, so that they hoped to close those down. And I'm like, you have any idea what that's going to do to the economy of that area? And anyway, so they pushed those dates back, so we're grateful for that. But as Larry already mentioned, they're already struggling we're not producing in coal spot areas, even though we're Carbon County. And we did have that Skyline mine, but unfortunately it's flooded. I guess they are trying to work around a few things. We hope that works out. But we've lost a great deal of revenue, which just passes the tax on to the residents. So it's a big issue for all of us. So I'm actually been sad to see coal not working as well as we could. There is still some here, but it's hard to get. It requires new technologies and difficult to persuade. But what I do know is if that date does come, whenever that comes, and we don't have a replacement, which takes sometimes a decade to prepare for it, I think that's when I'm really worried about our economy and about the jobs in our area. So I was actually kind of happy to see your slide about nuclear and the number of jobs that creates, because the job growth can help subsidize some of the money that we lose from the royalties from coal.
So I am going to give you, I think, a bad answer, a good answer, and hopefully a better answer. But I actually just want to take off on the commission because it reminded me a little bit, again, coming from Minnesota, we don't have minerals per se, but we do have the Iron Range. And so Northeastern, basically consider that Northeastern quarter, kind of what's called the arrowhead in Minnesota. Mining is incredibly important to our way of life up in northern Minnesota. Right, it's multi-generational. So I understand, I feel where this question's coming from. You know, families that have been impacted by the mining in northern Minnesota. Again, apples to oranges mean they're fruit, right? You know, it's iron mining versus coal mining, but I understand where this is coming from. So the bad answer is that, and this is, what some people will talk about. I don't want to, deliver this as some type of panacea. There are a number of initiatives underway to look at how do we use coal in terms of like a higher value product. So rather than burning it, turning it into higher value materials. And so just because you have nuclear doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be a one-to-one taking away from the market. I think that there is going to be opportunity for coal mining in the future. It just might not be for combustion, it might not be for energy, it might be for something else. Again, that might not save Carbon County right this second, but it is a grain of hope. I don't want to give you false hope, but it is something that is actively being discussed. It is something that's being researched at the national labs, and there is a small market for it right now. Again, would like to see that grow. The good answer is, I was just last week in Parsons, Kansas. And Parsons, Southeast Kansas, also coal mining territory, coal territory down there. And one of the biggest arguments for one of the nuclear companies who's looking to site a similar type of microreactor concept there is the folks in Parsons go, look at an hour and a half north of us in Burlington where they have the Wolf Creek nuclear generating station. They've got the best roads in Kansas. They've got the best schools in Kansas. It's a huge, huge economic driver. One of my favorite nuclear trivia facts is that the number one demographic indicator of how favorable you are to nuclear technology, it's not your age, it's not whether you're a man or woman, it is how close do you live to a nuclear power plant. The closer you live to a nuclear power plant, the more likely you are to support nuclear power. And it's because they understand that you do get those great jobs, that great tax base, and that floods into the community. Again, it's not a complete one-to-one when you're talking about the coal plant jobs and the coal mining jobs. But that being said, not all coal plants are at places like this where you have coal production, right? So that's a good answer. Better answer to me is, I don't know if you guys have noticed, we need a lot of power in this country, in this state, right? I don't think it's a very good argument to be taking any type of power off the grid, especially if it's producing well and it's performing well, right? I've even argued with environmentalists who are like, we need to be, carbon-free as quickly as possible. I was like, well, why would we take coal plants down and then replace them with natural gas plants then? If we could run those coal plants a little bit longer and bridge to nuclear, again, I'm granting them their argument. That would be better than just going to natural gas. You want to talk about, loss of jobs. There are very few jobs at a natural gas plant. And so this is when we talk about any of the above and looking at all these things, we need to be looking at the strengths of these technologies and the weaknesses of technology and kind of making a whole picture decision here. And so that's where, again, you're not going to hear me advocate for 100% nuclear, right? Nuclear should be part of the mix. It's something that hopefully we can get to a place where we're just looking at it clear-eyed and kind of, again, comparing apples to oranges, saying, well, what kind of fruit do I want right now? Right? Do I want apple juice or do I want orange juice? So that would be my better answer is, let's do both, right? But let's not lose the coal jobs. Let's keep the coal jobs and then add nuclear jobs to that.
Okay, we have a couple questions built up on that deal with cost per kilowatt. So wind and solar, relatively low cost per kilowatt. Coal is a relatively low cost per kilowatt. We know nuclear power plants are super expensive. And we have examples of them in Georgia being built at double or in the billions of dollars. So what is the advantage of that if the costs are so high? And I'm looking at Jade, it's more of a Jade question, but Commissioner, something I could answer.
So, again, I am not going to try to buffalo you on any of this stuff. That is a huge, and it's some of the things that, again, does need to be answered. Now, there are studies, for example, this is kind of the problem, I'll jump right into Powell. This is the problem we have in this country, is we build one of these reactors or two of these reactors and go, wow, that went way over budget, and let's never do that again. And we wait for a while, and then we build another first-of-a-kind reactor that goes way over budget. We're like, wow, that's terrible. We should never do that again. The smart people at MIT did a study, and they basically showed even the learning from Vogtle 3 and 4. We would have seen a dramatic cost curve decrease if we would have just kept building these things, right? And that's, I think, the guts we've got to have. When yes, nuclear is expensive. It's really expensive if you're just building first-of-a-kind reactors. Right? We got to get out of that mentality to make this economical. The other thing is I will point out lifespan. Right? When you're talking about a nuclear station, these nuclear stations are running up 60, 80 years. Right? Once these things get paid off, and again, look at the current generation right now. Some of the cheapest electricity you will find on the grid right now comes from current generation fleets, where the capital costs have already been paid off, right? And part of that is because the energy density of the fuel, right, the fuel costs, they don't fluctuate very much, and it's a very low proportion of the operating cost. Frankly, one of the biggest cost to a nuclear plant is the jobs, right, which is a good thing for communities, right? So that's, again, when we talk about strengths versus weaknesses, that's some of what we need to be meshing. And we need to be thinking about long-term investments in baseload. I'm not going to, again, poo-poo one technology over the other, but we need to be talking about capacity factor, right? When it doesn't blow, sun doesn't always shine, nuclear plant's always on. So when you think about building one turbine, really you got to be thinking about building 3 turbines. Because again, wind turbines are about a third capacity factor versus one coal plant. The other thing I will just mention that's a pet peeve of mine is a lot of times when we're building renewables, you have to build transmission, right? And that transmission cost is separate from the cost of a wind turbine. So, for example, if I'm building a $3 billion wind farm and I need to have a $3 billion transmission line, otherwise it's just a $3 billion art installation out in the field, right? That's not a $6 billion project. That's a $3 billion project. And so people ask, well, yeah, but if nuclear's $5 billion, it's more expensive. It's like, well, is it? So I think there's deeper discussion that can be had in terms of how we cost that nuclear. It is expensive, don't get me wrong, but it is that long-term investment in that baseload power that I think is important to factor.
Jade, can I say something? I don't know, it's been 3-4 months ago, the Secretary of Energy up in Salt Lake made the comment in reference to the East Coast that had that cold snap earlier this year. And when that happened, at the height of the problem, the power grid was ready to fail, their whole system. And they looked close and determined that during that period of time when it was real critical, only 2% of the power that was available came from renewables. 3% came from recycling plants that generate power. And it was obvious to him and to their team that renewables are really not our answer. They're just not going to be as dependable as we would expect. So we've got to do a little more than we're doing.
Thank you. So on some of that note, what is the potential of nuclear development here in the area? Specifically, there was a comment made, I can't remember if it was in the posted cards or in the chat, that there was talks about Newcastle, which is that nuclear power plant down in Greenwood, right? It's been a conversation for 20, 30 years now about the potential of that nuclear development. So what's the potential now in it? Why now? Anyone?
I think the potential is high. We're entertaining people that are here wanting to talk about it. So that's partly why this is so critical. Is like the population, the public here needs to become educated about nuclear in order for you to feel good about it here. Personally, for me, I've sat through a lot of meetings where it's talked about, and my word over it has gone way down. There's still questions that I have, and so these types of events are going to have to continue so that your questions get answered.
I'll just answer generically. When I talk to advanced reactor companies who are looking at places to deploy, some of the things that they're most worried about are workforce and availability of workforce, existing energy infrastructure, and they're looking for sites that are either zoned for industrial or even better zoned for nuclear, right? So when you think of this area and the legacy you have with the energy professionals you already have, the workforce that you have, the familiarity you guys have with the energy industry and the infrastructure you already have here, right? When you think about the industrial uses of that, you are a great location for potential nuclear deployment, which again, I think is a huge advantage because we're going to get right now, we're at a place where advanced reactors companies are trying to find places to site reactors. We're going to get to a place where that flips. And I think having some of these attractive elements are going to allow communities like yours to really advocate for themselves if this is the technology that you get. And again, I'm not making this decision for you. Right? This is something that you got to think about what you guys want for your community. But if this is a technology you want to choose to go down, you do have a lot of great advantages, and you can make a really good argument. Tracy.
Thanks, Tay. Someone asked Tracy a specific question, so I'll let her address it.
Great, thank you. So the question is, how closely have the companies that the state is or is planning on working with been vetted so that the state and the taxpayers don't have another Syncrete? So Syncrete, if you all remember, was something with our roadways where there was a new material used, we had to come back, we had to redo the roadways. This is a little bit different with nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is the most highly regulated industry in this country. It goes through many levels of regulation. So that provides us already a certain level of security and protection for our taxpayers. So before any sort of project gets deployed, it's going to have to go through many regulatory reviews and hurdles and do that at every single phase, to the point that the concrete used in nuclear energy is actually called nuclear concrete. So there's that. But what else is the state doing to make sure that the companies we work with are not going to leave the taxpayers on the hook? So one of the things that we do is we ask for financial assurances from companies. We've done that with Valor Atomics. So Valor Atomics runs into a problem, and something needs to be dealt with on the back end when they have fuel, which it's a test reactor, very limited amounts, the state will have money to make sure that it has the capabilities to manage that. So the state is actually taking steps and doing things to make sure that our ratepayers and our taxpayers are protected, in addition to this many layers of regulation that we have. Now, when it comes to spent nuclear fuel, used nuclear fuel, the federal government actually owns that fuel. So it's their responsibility to take control of and manage that fuel. So that doesn't put our taxpayers at risk. So there are many things that the state is doing that are within its purview to make sure that our taxpayers are protected. And I think Tay may also have some insight into how the nuclear industry operates and how our taxpayers are protected. So that is some information about how that's happened.
It's hard to improve on perfection there, Tracy. I'll just add a couple of things. So when Tracy talks about the multiple layers of regulation, a couple of things to just parse out here. So let's use Valor as an example. Right now, Valor is going through a DOE licensing process, right? Very rigorous. When you hear test reactors, some people are like, well, this is unproven technology. Right now, you guys have a test reactor. We just heard from the professor at USU. It's been operating for, 50 years, right? Part of Salt Lake County, right? So test reactor doesn't mean unsafe or unproven. Test reactor just means it's a small reactor, right? And again, very rigorous safety process that the DOE runs through, that Valor will have to get through before they can even make that thing go critical, right? That's a deal. That's just to make it go critical. That's just a testing. Now, if they want to put power on the grid and turn it to a commercial reactor, now you have to go through the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's licensing process, right? And I've heard it said the only two things that are harder to build than nuclear are hydropower and transmission lines, right? And part of that is because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, God's honest truth, is the internationally recognized gold standard of safety. It is an incredibly rigorous body. That means it goes slow, but frankly, if you want a cheap and fast reactor, go to Russia, So that's one thing that we got to keep in mind is, again, it's not like Tracy, I would trust Tracy Rice to make these decisions, but it's not like Tracy's just saying, well, yeah, they seem fine, let's put that reactor there. Multiple levels, and I should mention with the NRC, multiple points where you have to have community input and community approval for that process. The other thing that I'll mention, so let's say we get through all of that, right? Question I get all the time, right, but hey, what happens if the worst case scenario happens? Is the community going to be left holding the bag? The answer is no. Full stop. There is a federal law called the Price-Anderson Act. So any nuclear operator has to be fully bonded. There is an insurance level set that the company needs to carry. Now, anything that goes above that insurance bond, that is carried by the federal government under the Price-Anderson Act. So in no case, and again, I showed you the map with all the current generating. Those utilities carry that insurance. In any of those communities, if anything goes wrong, Price-Anderson Act backs them up. So in no case is a community left holding the bag on this.
And Tay, I would just add that the state has taken an extra step with Valor Atomics in asking for a financial assurance. So the state is taking this very seriously and doing everything it can to protect its ratepayers and its taxpayers. So there isn't a situation in which, and again, the federal government owns that used fuel. So there's no situation in which taxpayers are going to be on the hook for anything. We work with companies who come in and they have capital and they can move these projects forward, and then they have an obstacle course of regulations that they have to meet at the federal level to make sure that they can move these things forward. And the state is taking extraordinary steps to go above and beyond and make sure that we are protecting our ratepayers and our taxpayers so that these things go smoothly and that there's no outcomes that would potentially hurt our ratepayers.
Thanks, Tracy and Tay. Okay, I'm going to end on two last questions. One for Tay, one for the commissioners. We'll go with Tay first. It's going to kind of be a doozy. So, a lot of comments are asking about the different types of technology of these SMRs and these nuclear reactors. So some concerns around meltdowns, concerns about water usage, water rights, where are they going to get the water, we're already in a drought. So, and then also about the new types of fuel that come with these SMRs and how safe are those, and the testing that's come from that. So you can wrap that all up.
I can certainly do my best.
Good question.
So, I'm going to try to answer part, like, we can do another hour to really do that question, Justin. It is a doozy. I'm gonna start with a story. So a few years ago, I was working with similar to Valor, so high temperature gas reactor type concept. So getting graphite as the moderator, helium as the coolant. They're using TRISO. I'll get to what that means in a second. Actually, no. I'll explain what that means right now. I'll make the story better. So TRISO, I mean, this is again, science people are incredible. They can take essentially a poppy seed of uranium, okay? And what they can do is essentially triple coat it in different carbides, right? Now, one of those, this is what we call TRISO, it's 3 layers, okay? So you've got the little uranium kernel, that's your fuel, and then it's triple encoded. One of those carbides is silicon carbide. Anybody know what silicon carbide is used for? It's tank armor. It's the second hardest substance known to man. If you wanted to get, to the uranium and had a TRISO particle, which is, again, it's a dot. It's a tiny little particle. You'd have to sit there with a diamond and try to scrape that stuff off. Okay. So I'm sitting up in Alaska. I'm talking to a state senator, and he goes, "Hey, what happens? Alaska. I can see Russia from my house, right? What happens if the Russians invade?" Right, and they come to this reactor, and they storm the gates and they overwhelm the security guards, and they get into the reactor, and I'm just like, keep going, tell me more. You guys believe me? So first of all, our national defense shield has been penetrated, and that's not our first problem. Second of all, so Boris gets into the reactor that's operating, and he's not died from doing that. So he's sitting there with a diamond trying to chisel this thing off because Russia doesn't have enough of their own fissile material. This is a little bit of what happens with nuclears because again, we've got the Simpsons, or for my dad it's Jane Fonda, the China syndrome, right? We kind of get in this mode of it's just so extreme, and we let ourselves kind of get into this place where we just let any flight of fancy go. And this is where again, this is extremely well understood technology. I mean, set aside the commercial fleet. Think about our Navy, our nuclear Navy, and how many hours of, you've got 2 19-year-olds, managed by a 21-year-old, they're sitting on top of this thing. You want the best advocate for nuclear? Talk to a Navy nuke guy. Every air molecule of air they breathe, all the food they eat, the heat in the summer, it all comes from nuclear. And we have not had a single safety incident in the nuclear Navy. In the United States, we've had one. That was 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island, you look into it, all the systems work. Yeah, it was a big commercial disaster. They lost a power plant, probably lots and lots of money in revenue. But if you were standing at the gates of 3 Mile Island when that incident happened, the maximum exposure in terms of radiation you could receive would have been about the equivalent of half of a chest X-ray. So we understand how to do this technology extremely well. And again, a lot of these advanced technologies, we didn't just crack this stuff last week. One of my favorite videos I've ever seen in nuclear, it's like from the late 80s. It's like these 2 old engineers, and they're sitting there talking about one of the experimental reactors that they had in Idaho. And they literally, like Fukushima, right? Fukushima, the reason that happened is they lost power to the reactor, right? Now, I would argue if you've got a reactor that's in a flood-prone area, don't put your backup generators in the basement. It's the first place that floods. That's a story for another time. But they basically simulated that. They unplugged this reactor, and they go, and then what happened next? They go, well, we wouldn't eat a ham sandwich. I swear to God. So when we're talking about these advanced reactors, this is well understood, well documented technology. Now, Jade mentioned water usage. In a lot of the cases with these advanced reactors, they're actually going to use less water than a current coal plant would. So you're actually using, if you were to replace a coal plant 1-to-1 with a nuclear plant, you're actually going to see a lower water usage. Some of these reactors, like again, that use either molten salts or graphite and helium, the only water they're really using other than to run the steam cycle, which a lot of the time that water is recovered, but it's the water for the bathrooms, right? So we're not talking about a tremendous amount of water usage. I understand water is incredibly important, but that's where I think, again, putting these things in perspective is important, right? We are, you will hear, and this is something that I think is really important to be very honest about. You will hear advanced reactor companies talk about what, dry or air cooling. Don't let anyone fool you. That does come with a cost, right? There is a trade-off with efficiency, which makes the power more expensive. But again, that I just told you that information now. Now you can go out and you can have that conversation with that advanced reactor company. You're thinking about dry cooling? I don't want to see my energy prices go up that much. And you can basically weigh your options. That's what we're out here trying to do. I'll say it one more time. I'm not here to convince you on nuclear power. My job is to bring the best facts that I know and give you guys access to some of the best subject matter expertise so we're making an eyes wide open decision about whether this technology fits for your community or it doesn't fit for your community. And I could go on for an hour, but yes, that's best I can do, see the rock across the water.
Thanks, Tate. In closing, this is a question for the commissioner.
Before we move on, the question about water. All the water in this valley is owned by somebody. And for anyone to come in here that needs water for whatever reason, whether it's power generation or manufacturing or anything else, they're going to have to come up with some water. Nobody gets shorted on water but the person who wants to either sell it or lease it. And so, like right now, I think Carbon Canal is on 75% delivery. If an industry was here, they would be on the same reduction of the water they either purchased or their lease. That's kind of we've been digging into this for years. We know that if an industry comes in, they're going to have some water. One outfit that we're working closely with right now will take the sewer effluent and treat it one more level, then pump it from the sewer plant back up into the industrial park that the county owns. That's the water there. So it's a water reuse program. State of Utah is really excited about that. And, the company is willing to pay for it. So, we are short on water. I think that's a misunderstood part here in Utah. Well, some of these things that are funding Utah, particularly around the water, it's really not the shortest link of water. Part of some of the water is still solid,
Thank you for that. In closing, one last question for the commissioners. What is one thing you want the community members to know about these conversations that you're going to have with nuclear or you're currently having with nuclear companies? What's one thing you want them to know, the one key takeaway from tonight?
Well, I'd like to say that the one takeaway, I hope that we'll all remember, it was something given to me or shared with me, is that it used to be said that knowledge is power. We're realizing that actually power is knowledge. And it's a requirement in order to advance. And every society that embraces technology has the advantage over the opposition or those who would be maintained. I do believe it's important. I don't know if this is the best solution for us, but I do know we can learn about it. And I hear the convention, it's just to talk about it, go over the facts, dispel the myths, number one, but even the hard realities. Look how great it was. He told us the straight truth that it's not all great. there are problems. It does cost more money, and it does require water. I appreciate that. We need the candidness. And so I'm grateful for these. Again, I hope we can just have a dialogue about it. Tackle these unsolved problems. Come in, have these conversations, come with some good questions. We're going to just try the best we can to help answer it and just at least learn about it. So we have good dialogue, conversations. But I just want us to think about that, how important power is, and all the jobs that are being created and that we're hoping to create all have the power to acquire things. And they don't want the renewable energies. We're grateful for those. Grateful. Again, when the sun's not shining, wind's not blowing, we still need that base load. And that's how I understand it. But anyway, thank you.
Maybe just in closing too, I know there's concerns out of that there's a feeling that we go about doing things, making decisions for the county without the residents' knowledge. There are companies that we have non-disclosure agreements with, we can't talk about. That there will be the appropriate time to do that. Ones we have these agreements with or talking personal type things. Nobody wants stuff in their backyard, but I'm sorry, it will end up in our backyards. Not only the industries, but the homes for people who have to move here to work in these facilities. So we're not making decisions behind your back. This is a good example of a controversial issue that really needs the public's input. We're not making decisions. But we do have people come through the door and they begin to ask these questions, and we have to begin to answer them. We have to be open, we have to be honest with them, and we have to know what resources we do have in order for them to want to spend any more time than an initial visit. Get them to come back and to dig through layer of questions that they have to have answered before they can come. That's going on every day. Shanny and the team work on that every day. And just because we don't bring it all to the community every time we can't do that. But when decisions have to be made, that becomes a public thing. We'll know about it, hear about it. We're happy to sit down anytime in our office and spend whatever time you can answer questions too. So we can try to be a little bit further.
Thank you. Let's give a round of applause to the commissioners thank you to the Serta team. They're the ones that took care of all of our pretzels, ice cream. Go ahead. Okay, we'll go to the next one. So we're going to have workshop number 2 on June 18th. It's a Thursday night, just like tonight, and we're going to have conversations from mining and milling to power production. So we're going to have industry experts that are in the mining and milling industry. We're hopeful to have power generation, nuclear companies here to have this conversation. And I know you all asked a lot of good questions that were in depth on nuclear power development, and those companies will be here to answer those questions next time. We did record this whole entire session. It will be posted somewhere. We'll figure that out. But it probably will be posted on the county website and the county social medias. So that if you want to go back and rewatch this, if you want to share it, it will be auto-recorded and ready for everyone's viewing. So with that, we hope to see you next time on June 18th. Bring your friends, your neighbors, whoever. We want to just have these conversations. So thank you.